Okay, 5 seconds.
Okay. Did it go?
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Are people here?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Right on time. I love it. So I'm going to get started. I'm Andrea Potter, and you guys are here to learn how to preserve pickles in like the oldest fashioned way before canning. And so we've got, in the next hour, I'm essentially just going to give you a few different ideas for using up foods that you're growing. I'm curious to know from the participants, maybe you could comment like what you're growing that you have enough of that you think you're going to put up. I've got a lot of beans happening, like every day a little bit more than what I can eat fresh. And there are some carrots happening, and I did not do pickling cucumbers this year, so I bought some cucumbers, but in the past I've had a couple good like bumper crop years of cucumbers. So curious to know from you guys like what you have going on in your gardens. And even if you just have herbs, like you're doing something really minimal, you can use those too. And it feels super special to have something homemade with something store-bought that you can kind of like combine and then do your homemade pickles like really from scratch. So I'll do a quick overview of kind of like what we're up to today, and then I'm going to demonstrate 3 different varieties of jarred pickles. And I'm also going to talk quite a bit about the difference between canning and fermenting, because even though you all end up with a jar like this of, you know, preserved, crunchy, tangy, salty vegetables, it's almost the opposite process for actually preserving. And then the nutrition benefits and everything are like, they're very different from canning to fermenting. I'm also curious from participants if anyone has done fermentation before, like even maybe yogurt or bread. You know, they all seem like really disparate kind of projects, but actually there's quite a bit in common with things that ferment in that they take time and they use an energy source, so natural sugars, to fuel fermentation, and that results in most cases, the kind of food preservation we're talking about, it results in like a sour flavor, and the acid that's produced from that is what actually preserves the vegetables. So getting into that a little bit more as we go to understand how it all works. But you know, this can be super simple and you could do just 1 jar at a time. So my background is as a chef, and then I got to learn about nutrition because I started becoming a lot more curious about like what happens after you eat the food. You know, like as a chef, we were primarily responsible for, you know, how it looks and how it tastes, and then kind of absolving of responsibility after that. And I got more interested in food for nutrition's sake as well. So I got into fermented foods from that perspective about like gut health, gut healing. So perhaps some of you are also here with interest about that. And then some people have come to my fermentation classes from a gardening background or a farming background, and they're like, okay, I got more cabbages than I know what to do with. Like, how do you make sauerkraut? Just from a pragmatic like point of view, right? So either way, like you can come from over here and from over here, and we all end up together like brining pickles. So it doesn't matter how you got here, and everybody benefits from like less packaging, less waste, making things homemade, and you know, sustainable food systems, and all of that. So it's pretty cool. I think that people come at it from lots of different backgrounds, that I've met so many interesting folks who are doing cool projects who get interested in fermentation as a food preservation method. So some of you may be cooking along, and just put in the comments and put your little hand up if you are here and actually cooking along with me. We have the video turned off for now, just it's a little bit easier for me, but if you want to turn the video on, perhaps we could do that. And just, yeah, if you have any like questions about your specific setup, that's great, but I'm going to try to be as explicit as possible with my setup so that you can easily follow along. So again, I only have an hour. I'm going to kind of launch into it. So say this is your first fermentation project. I'm just going to assume it's a blank slate, because perhaps you'll learn something even if you have made kimchi before or something like that. There's always something new to learn, even just in the way that you chop something or a flavor combination or something. So first I'm going to start with the difference between canning and brined/fermentation. So these pickles were an experiment I did last year. They are beans from my mom's garden, and I did the same recipe with this fermented bean as I did with the canned beans. So I had a whole lot of beans, and I wanted to preserve them for at least a year. And so I did some canning where I used vinegar, and I did a hot water bath and the whole kit and caboodle in those terms. The benefit to doing it the canned way is that they will last well beyond a year. Like, I know they say eat them within the first year, but they are like apocalypse food. They're not going to go bad for a long time. So if I was preparing, you know, for the apocalypse, which seems to be kind of more the case these days, I would do some canning because it enables me to have to not have to refrigerate at all, right? Just keeping it in like a cooler spot is fine. That kind of canning creates a seal. So when you use a mason jar and the mason lid dips in from the vacuum that's created within, it creates a seal, and that's what preserves it too. And then you've got the acid with it. So in one case, you're doing canning, and that requires acid vinegar, right? For all vegetables that are not high acidic, you have to put vinegar or citric acid or lemon juice, right? For brined pickles, now we've got something else, also in a mason jar, looking similar, but it's totally different. So you can do small batch, you add salt water brine, and that's it. You do not add any acid. So the question is, like, how is this safe to eat if it's just salt water brine? There's this really incredible process that happens. You can even see a little bit of a difference here. I've eaten all of the vinegar ones, so you can't compare them, but I'm going to shake this up a little bit so you can see how cloudy this is. You check that out. You wouldn't see that in a typical store-bought pickle, a vinegar pickle, this kind of cloudy brine, but this is actually indicative of a good homemade fermented pickle, is the cloudiness. Sometimes you'll see it as a film on the bottom, and that's just the yeast organisms that have done their fermentation and sunk to the bottom. So when you shake it up, you'll see kind of a cloudiness. So don't be freaked out about the cloudiness. It's excellent. It's a good quality product when you have that going on. So the fermentation is what creates the acid in the jar. That makes sense. We'll get it as we go. It took a little bit of trust in the process to just have it happen, because like when you taste the bean, it's like, okay, it's a little bit crunchy, it's a little bit like slightly sweet, and that slightly sweet, the vegetable sugars are what fuel the fermentation. And so by just giving it the right amount of salt water, the salt is there to buffer the putrefying bacteria. I hate using that word, but I don't know what else to say. Like the rotting bacteria that would make it turn into compost. That's one kind of fermentation. And you guys are probably familiar with compost fermentation, right? Like it speeds up when it gets hot out, it slows down when it's cool out. There's certain things that can accelerate your compost. That's one kind of fermentation vein. And then another kind of fermentation vein is food preservation. So it's almost like the opposite, right? We're not rotting, we're actually preserving. But this kind of fermentation, but we're only altering the environment with salt. Salt has just enough antibacterial action that it holds back the rotting bacteria from proliferating, while the acidifying bacteria like lactobacillus and other kinds of probiotics are acidifying bacteria. They start to rise in numbers steadily, and they also kill off some of the competing bacteria that would rot. So there's this kind of very interesting battleground in the first few days of fermentation, and it takes a little bit of trust in the process to get that the good guys win under the right conditions, which is a 2% or more salt brine. Then the good guys always win. It's so cool. And if they don't, then it becomes very obvious. So unlike canning, where if something went wrong, we're talking about a foodborne illness called botulism, which is like the big bad foodborne illness that can actually kill people, right? That you should learn canning under a professional, like a professional guidance, seriously. Use like the Bernardin or the Mason websites to use their recipes, and don't start substituting ingredients. So not to scare you off of canning, but take the food safety part of it very seriously, because the repercussions for that, you can't smell botulism and you can't taste it. Sometimes there's not a seal on the jar, but that's not even like completely 100%. So contrast to fermented pickles. It may feel strange to us to leave your food out at room temperature for days and days, and sometimes weeks and months, unrefrigerated and not stored in vinegar. But fermentation actually has a much better food safety record than canning ever did. It's an ancient food technology that when done under the right salinity conditions, it works. And there's no cases of foodborne illness from fermented vegetables. I actually had a fermented vegetables like product line. I was making sauerkraut and kimchi in Vancouver, and I had to get it approved by the Coastal Health Authority, and so I had to jump through a whole ton of hoops for them to understand what I was doing. What I was doing was not canning; it was almost the antithesis of canning. And eventually, I had it approved. So I had to prove the food safety record of my kind of product, and I dug and dug and dug and dug, and there were no cases of foodborne illness from fermented vegetables. So yay, that's a win. We can relax about it, and we can have a little bit more fun with these types of recipes in terms of adding different ingredients, as long as our salt level is the right amount. So now that we know the difference between canned vegetables and fermented vegetables, you know, you give someone a jar of pickles, they're like, oh, I love pickles. Did you know these are fermented pickles? So these fermented pickles have some benefits. Each of you will get a handout just like this, and it has the recipe as well as some nutrition information on it. So I just want to quickly go over some of the benefits. You guys can like get into it and read it, and I'll give you some resources. So fermented pickled foods, sometimes we eat these as appetizers. Sometimes we chop them up, and maybe like I'll cut up fermented beans and put them in a potato salad, for example. Sometimes we just have them as like a little snack platter before dinner. People like to snack on pickles while they're drinking beer. Like there's so many ways that you can incorporate pickled foods. And I know a lot of people just think of like the cucumber as, you know, the pickle, but once you start pickling, you're like, oh my gosh, I could pickle that and I could pickle that. Depending on where you come from, different vegetables are the pickle, you know. Just as a little, I'm like, I have time to tell this story, right? I was doing a class for a harvest festival one time, and I was showing people how to make classic dill cucumber pickles. I'm going to show you guys how to do that today. It'll be the first one I do. And people were tasting them and so on. And so I was teaching about the benefits of fermentation and so on. And one person came and tried the pickle, and they said, this is weird, but it just kind of reminds me of my mom's Lebanese turnip pickle, even though like obviously they're different vegetables. And he was so inspired by the like food memory that he called his mom, and she got on the phone with me, and she was explaining how she did it. And sure enough, her Lebanese turnip pickle did not have vinegar. She did it the fermented way. And so it was basically the same process as cucumbers. So I thought, oh, that's cool. It's like the nuanced flavor of fermentation comes through, and is different than kind of a harsher, just acetic acid flavor of vinegar pickles. And in the same day, someone else came by and said, oh, this is going to sound weird, but this flavor is reminding me of my mom's Chinese daikon pickle. And he explained the process whereby she had a clay pot and like a crock, and she was doing a continuous pickle. So she was doing fermented pickles and then adding vegetables and harvesting vegetables out of the pot and then adding more. So it's a different kind of iteration of the same kind of thing. Some people do like perpetual pickle pots and stuff. So I'm going to get into just the batch method today, but you guys can like learn about and have so much fun with this. As far as resources go, if you have one book, I like this one. I know it's backwards on here. Wild Fermentation by Sandor Katz, K-A-T-Z. This is my very well-loved and signed copy. I'm a big fan. So it's like the opposite of a boring cookbook. This has such great stories about food culture and tradition, kind of woven in with really practical recipes. So if you have just one book for this topic, that's the one. And his newest one about fermentation is much, much bigger and kind of abandons the recipe format. It's still amazing, and it has pictures. But this one has fun little hand drawings and stuff, so it's good, right? So benefits: improves digestion, has loads of probiotics, like loads and loads of probiotics. Only having about 2 tablespoons of a fermented pickle before, during, or after your dinner will give you enough probiotics that help you to digest that food. So it gives you beneficial bacteria that help you digest the food. It also gives you loads of enzymes that help you digest the food, enzymes that help digest proteins, sugars, and fats. And so you have a more comfortable, less bloaty feeling after meals if you incorporate some live pickles. These are never heated, and so I don't heat them. If I do cook something and I want them to be warmed, that's okay, as long as, you know, it's not a temperature too hot to touch. So if I was making kimchi fried rice, I'd do my fried rice, take it off the hob, and then add the kimchi at the end and fold it through. So making sure that you're not heating your fermented pickles. Enzyme activity increases the absorption of nutrients, so you actually get more out of the beautiful organic vegetables that you have. It creates additional nutrients. This part is amazing, like as if this doesn't seem magic already. The kind of cloudiness in the brine that I was talking about is because of those yeasts. The yeasts, their little yeast bodies, create B vitamins in their life process. So if you've ever seen nutritional yeast as a food supplement or a food product, it's a fermented food product as well. It's got loads of B vitamins, like so much that it's sold as a food supplement instead of just a food. Those same types of yeasts are in here, so loads and loads of B vitamins in the brine of your pickles. And delicious. So take like a shot of your pickle juice, for example. It will help you digest the rest of your meal. Some people even take a shot of this pickle juice to battle acid reflux. And I know that sounds like the opposite of what you should do if you have an acid problem, but it's actually found to help regulate stomach acid that is inconsistent. So in many cases for acid reflux, this kind of pickle juice will help you regulate. Whereas if you did the same thing with a vinegar pickle, you'd be in a ton of pain. So you just, if you ever need to experience it for yourself, there are dramatic differences between the two. It strengthens your immune system because 60 to 80% of your immune system is the lining of your gut. And so by helping the lining of your gut do its job better, you are creating a healthier immune system with defense against like illness and disease. And it actually can remove toxins from your food, which is so cool. So say in theory, one of these vegetables was cross-contaminated with an E. coli bacteria. It's not. I use clean vegetables and I scrubbed my jars, but I'm not sterilizing everything. Like this does not happen in a sterile environment. This happens in a regular kitchen environment, somewhere that you prepare dinner. So say something happened where an E. coli bacteria got onto this carrot and then I put it in the salt water. Having that ferment for days and days, you'd think would be disastrous. But actually what happens is that because the acidity is consistently, you can say the pH is lowering, so the acidity is getting higher, it becomes inhospitable to things like E. coli and Salmonella bacteria and can actually outnumber them and then completely kill them. So I'm just saying, like, cleanliness, not sterilization, is required here. I'm gonna get started on my first jar of pickles and we can chat as I do that. So, number one, everyone thinks of cucumbers. This time of year is like the cucumber time, and when you get into it, you have to like really go pick them at the right size. If you've got them that are way too big or way too small, they're not gonna pickle at the same time. So try to be consistent. This kind is actually not a pickling cucumber. This is a small, like, you know, eating cucumber. I find these work pretty good. This is what I could find for my class today. And I like these ones because they're very consistent. I think the BC hothouse ones are are pretty consistently grown to the same size. And I found that that size fits inside a 1 liter jar just perfect. So I'll give you guys a bit of a tour of my ingredients and my equipment first, I guess. Ingredients, whatever you want to pickle, seriously. Like I've got cauliflower, carrots, cukes, onion. I've got some herbs, dill, bay leaf or grape leaf or an oak leaf are a must. Not a must. Honestly, I've had them work without it, but they're reassurance that your pickle is going to stay crunchy. And most of us want crunchy pickles. And that's because the tannins in these leaves are natural food preservers. They naturally keep your pickles crunchy, so you don't have to add things like calcium chloride that would be in a pickling salt. Speaking of salt, move on to that. Any natural salt will be fine. Use non-iodized salt. Iodine is it's antibacterial, and it's so antibacterial that it actually can prevent fermentation from happening normally. So there's a certain amount of iodine already in sea salt or even in Himalayan salt, which originally came from the sea too. So just use a good salt, and even kosher salt is fine. Most kosher salts are non-iodized. Just don't use free running table salt because it has silicone in it and it has way too much iodine in it, and it even sometimes has sugar in it, which can really throw things off. So salt, just good salt. And I just experiment with different kinds of salts. I go like gray Celtic salt or Himalayan salt, or this is Portuguese sea salt, whatever floats your boat. I like to use fine salt. I used to always use coarse, and as long as if you weigh the salt, then you will be very assured that you have the right amount. If you're not weighing the salt, I have some suggestions in the recipe about how much of each to use for coarse and for fine. So don't worry about it if you don't have a scale. You can still totally do this at home. The other piece of equipment that you need is really high tech. You need a smaller jar that fits inside the bigger jar. Wait, this is it. Smaller jar that fits inside the bigger jar. That's it. Like I don't use a bunch of the fermentation gadgets that they sell online and stuff. I've been doing this for so many years and find that this setup works as good as anything else. And you're going to need some sort of tightly woven cloth or a coffee filter to put on top of your jar, and then a rubber band to fix around it. And like that's it. So simple. The simpler the better, for sure. I have another weight that could be used instead of a jar. This is, you know, those old canning jars that had glass lids before the metal ones came into fashion. So this is a Weck jar lid, and it fits perfectly inside of a wide mouth mason jar. So I sometimes use these. I sometimes just use another jar on top. I just got this at the soap dispensary. You can get any of these kinds of jars, you know, at hardware stores and stuff. And you can even reuse old pasta jars and things. So just as long as it has a pretty wide mouth, that's the way that I like to do it. So we're ready to make a jar of pickles, and say you only have enough for 1 or 2 jars. That's what's great about this, is you can just do a little bit at a time. You don't need to wait for tons as if you were canning and doing a whole a whole assembly line, right? It doesn't have to be a big production. A couple tips about cucumbers is, if you're mixing a brine for cucumbers, add a little bit more salt than you would for other vegetables, and that's because the water content in these is so high that it actually dilutes your brine. Okay, so I said 2% brine, that's the magic amount. So that means like a heaping tablespoon or 20 grams per liter of water, 20 grams of salt for 1 liter of water. That's typical for most vegetables. For cucumbers, I'll do 3 to 3.5%. So add a little bit more salt for cukes. Add a little bit more salt too if it's a super hot day, because again, fermentation speeds up during the hotter days. So cucumbers, a little tip I learned. This is so cool. You got the stem and the flower end. If you take a moment to just snip the flower end off or cut the flower end off just a tiny bit, the flower end actually has enzymes in it which will quickly rot your cucumber. So I found I got more crisp cucumbers when I started to cut the ends off. And so I'll go ahead and cut the ends off of a few of these guys here. Come have a look down here. This is exciting. It's my first jar of cucumbers this year. And my kids are obsessed with these. So they're going to be really stoked that the product of this class is that they get pickled cucumbers. Your jar, which is just soapy water washed, you don't need to sterilize again. Put your bay leaf or your grape leaf or oak leaf in the bottom of the jar. Even other leaves like kaffir lime leaf, if you wanted to get kind of a funky flavor in there, you can add whatever green leaf is edible that you love. And then the herbs that you add, I'm adding some dill sprigs because I'm going to go just classic dill cucumber. So if you had flowering dill, that would be ideal. I like to put a nice big dill flower like right in the bottom of the jar. But the stuff I got today is not flowering. It's just the regular baby dill. Put in as much as you like. You know, I'm putting in about that much. And if you wanted to put garlic in, you could put a whole clove of garlic. Don't chop it up first, and I'll tell you why in a bit. Whole clove of garlic, or cut it in half at the very most. Or if you put pickling spices in here, okay, so some people are really specific about the kind of pickle that they want. If you use pickling spices, I found this little hack that works great. And you take one of those non-bleached tea bags and put like 1 or 2 tablespoons of pickling spice in it, and then you put it at the bottom of your jar, and then you jam your pickles on top. You jam your cucumbers on top. And that's so that your spices don't all float to the top, because you don't want floaties in your fermented pickles. So I'm filling this as full as I can. And if I've got any that are kind of taller than the rest, I actually will trim them to fit, because I want a nice flush surface at the top. I think I have just the right amount. Okay, so that's the cucumber situation. Everyone's really comfortable in there. All right, then I'm gonna make my brine. So to water, I'm not getting too fancy with water here. I'm using Vancouver tap water. If you have a filter, go ahead and use a filter. Honestly, I found like my pickles are not picky with the water that I have access to. If you ever had water that was less than very clean, then certainly use a filter, or if you ever had to buy water, sure. Well, my scale isn't working, which is fine. We can improvise. So the scale is the best way to know exactly how much salt you have. If you're doing massive quantities, if you want to do a 10 times recipe and make a huge crock of cucumber pickles, you should get a scale out. But for small batches, I'm not too fussed about it. 20 grams of salt is a heaping tablespoon. That's good for 1 liter of water. And so just stir to dissolve. You do not have to like heat this and then cool it down. I've seen some recipes for that. There's no need to do that. Just make sure it's dissolved. And then I'm going to use, oh yeah, and then I mentioned for cucumber pickles, you need just a little more. This is how exacting of a cook that I am. I'm going to use a little more, and then just pour it straight on top of the cubes. It'll work out. People who are maybe on the more perfectionist side of things would be horrified by this right now, but honestly, it works. It's just been working. If it doesn't work, the worst thing that's going to happen is you'll get 1 jar of less than super crunchy cucumbers. In that case, I make tartar sauce. Okay, so I'm just filling it as high as I need to get everybody submerged in there. And then I can choose, like my cucumbers are pretty weighted down. I'm not going to have anything floating up, but it still is good measure to put a weight on top. So I'm going to use my little Wex jar in this case and just go plop, just like that. I'm just making sure everything is under that brine and snug in there. This is not an airlocking system. You may read articles about like needing to have an airlock in your fermented vegetables, and I have never found that to be the case. So this process is actually like selectively aerobic. So if the bacteria have some access to oxygen, it's fine. Most of the fermentation is happening under the water, and that's all anaerobic anyway. You do not need to get a special kind of like pickle pipe or airlock thing like you'd see for beer and wine. Not really necessary. I've used them before. The benefit to that, honestly, the only benefit I really found is that there's less smell. It isn't going to be too stinky, but it's going to smell like a jar of pickles on the counter for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. So if that bugs you, get an airlocking system. But I find this works fine. So as long as I've got everything under the brine, I'm actually going to add a tiny bit more brine just to be really sure that everything's covered. Then I will put my tightly woven cloth. I mean, like not cheesecloth, because even if you fold it over a few times, fruit flies can get in there. Fruit flies are really going to ruin your fermentation party. So that's it. This cute little setup right here. I'll bring you down here so you can see it. That cute little setup right there can set on the counter for, I'd say 7 days to 10 days for cucumbers. And that's just from experience. So during that 7 to 10 days, I'm just going to tell you the process once, and then I'm going to make 2 more flavors of pickles so you can see this as with more variety. But the same like maintenance goes for every single kind. Because we were sure that we didn't chop up the garlic small and we don't have pickling spices to worry about, there shouldn't be too much stuff that will rise to the top here. But it is normal for a certain amount of like foam to be created, and the foam, well, it will rise to the top, and then you can just take a clean spoon, and from days 1 to about 3, you might see more of this foam. It's good. It indicates that the fermentation is happening. If you don't see it, then you don't need to worry. It could have happened that the foam rose and then subsided when you were just like not looking at it. Maybe you went to work, if you're still going to work, or it happened in your sleep. So don't freak out if it doesn't happen, but if you get a little bit of foam, it's fine. You can just take your spoon or a clean paper towel, like a napkin or paper towel, and just run it along the rim of the jar and get any floaty bits out of there. Not because the floaty bits are bad, but because they are a surface where mold could land, right? It just becomes a surface where kind of inviting other organisms that aren't going to help fermentation, right? We can talk about mold more because most of the questions I get are about mold. So might as well use this as a little segue. Mold is bad. And I know that seems obvious, but there are so many different kinds of mold. So in general, we're just going to say mold is bad and mold has kind of like legs. If you see fruiting mold on the top, some people would be fine to skim it, right? And then eat the pickles beneath. And I actually used to be in that camp. So I'm not saying this is, you know, bad and wrong. It's actually pretty common. People will see mold and then skim it and eat the rest of the jar. I actually became very, very sensitive to the flavor of mold during both of my pregnancies. And I just had an aversion to anything, like if anything got moldy, I would just not have anything to do with it. But since then, I have learned that like mold spores obviously easily get mixed in even when you're trying to skim them, but they do have kind of a root system that can grow into the brine itself. And then it would get mixed in. So you're not going to get food poisoning right off the bat from most kinds of molds. And many people are saying, oh, I've been doing it for years and I'm fine. And they probably are fine years later because it's a cumulative toxic effect. So depends on how fine with that you are. But it is best practice to not eat moldy ferments, to not skim. That said, most times when people think that there's a mold situation, it's actually just that foam itself, which just looks kind of white, almost like cooked egg whites, right? So if it's just froth, don't worry about it, it's fine. Just skim off the froth. So this is the only part, this is kind of like gardening and you're just like in there checking, pulling the weeds out, right? And this is the only part that takes your attention the first 3 days or so. After that, you're going to start noticing some changes happening in your pickle jar. So your cucumbers are pretty cool little indicators of acidity because they, and green beans as well, turn from bright green to olive green color when they acidify. So you can start seeing acidification happening. And if you're a nerd like me and you want to use a pH strip, you could try the pH every day and then like note what is happening, and the pH is always going lower, so it's always becoming more acidic. But your taste buds are also another measure of how acidic it is. So once your cucumbers all turn olive colored and it starts to smell pickly, then you can use your taste buds and they're going to tell you, okay, it's acidic. And honestly, the best way to know if your cucumbers are done is to try one. So you pull one out after a few days, say a week, pull one out, cut it in half lengthwise, and you'll see little rings. And so much like when you cook a potato, you can see kind of a more translucent ring around, and then you can see the raw bit in the middle, right? With cucumbers, you can see the fermentation happen from the outside in. So if you see a raw bit in the middle and the rest of it is cooked with the acid of fermentation, that's called a half sour, and some people prefer them that way. And they're kind of a delicacy now because you will not find a half sour in stores because of most food regulations don't allow for half sours because the acidity is not low enough. But they are fine for home eating. You can do it. We've been doing it for a long time. So half sours are delicious. Kids sometimes prefer them if fully sour is too sour. If you want them to fully sour, then just like wait another few days and then the rest of them will be fully sour. So that's a little tip for cucumbers, like kind of harvest them whenever you want, and then you can keep them on the counter until the jar is gone. Or say you want this to last a bit longer, it will last for, most of these pickles will last for at least a year. I find cucumber pickles are a little more sensitive and they might last a few months. So honestly, this is not the apocalypse food. You should eat your cucumber pickles a little more fresh. And then after cucumber season and cucumber pickles are gone, I move on to all of the other vegetables and just eat those the rest of the year. So then I'll be enjoying, like my pickled beans, these are from last year's crop. And these are delicious. I had some yesterday. So I'm gonna move on to my next jar of pickles. There's my cucumber pickles set aside, and I'll put that to bed and just leave it. Right, next one. Let's do carrot ginger, or ginger carrots. Ginger carrots are great. Okay, so I'm using organic vegetables. I mean, most of you are doing organic or close to organic gardening, I expect, so you probably won't need to worry too much about pesticides. If these were from a sprayed crop, then I would peel them, but they're not, so I'm not going to. I just do the general wash. A little quiz for you guys. Where we talk about probiotics and acidifying bacteria, does anyone know where probiotics come from initially? It's like, I did not sprinkle anything in here. I didn't use a starter of any sort. I didn't order anything online. You totally can if you want to pay for that type of thing, but you do not have to. Anybody? I'm going to tell you. Okay. All probiotics initially come from the soil, like all of them. Oh, the signs that fermented pickles have gone bad? Awesome question. Let's get into that. I'll get into that once I finish putting these in the jar. Once they've gone bad, they're going to tell you all about it. They don't go quietly, that's for sure. So Odin, I'll get back to you about how they've gone bad quickly. All probiotics are initially come from the soil. We know that people who have exposure to soil have better immune systems, and that's because their microbiota, their internal microflora are better established. And so, like as an anecdote as well, like I was a farm kid and we found that farm kids had less sick days at school than town kids did. And now there's all sorts of science to back this up, that people who have more exposure to pets and to dirt have stronger immune systems because their microbiota is so varied and so diverse and dynamic and resilient. That's the most important thing. So what I'm saying is, I'm not too crazy about like using vegetable washes ever. And even when I wash my carrots, I'm just washing my carrots. Like I still have little, reminders that this came from dirt. It's okay. That's good. So using local in-season produce is a great way to know that there's like a certain amount of dirt on it. Great. So I'm going to do the same thing for these cucumber pickles, in that I'll add a bay leaf to the bottom, whatever kind of tannic leaf you want. I saw somebody add a green tea bag, and I'm like, oh, of course, because it's tannic. That's great. That's so smart. So I'm going to chop some ginger, and I'm a bit of a lazy cook, so I just keep the skin on the ginger because I'm just using this for flavor. Also, like, there's nothing wrong with eating ginger skin. So I'll put, I don't know, 4 decent sized slices in the bottom of my ginger carrots. And then I'm going to cut these into like carrot sticks, like you would for dipping. First, I measure them and make sure that they're not too long for my jar. Forgot to do that first. I'm going to cut it down to size. Perfect. So I want it to actually come below the rim of the first line here and give it a little bit of head space. So I'll make sure I measure all of them up against that. And I'm going to save all these little tidbits to fill in any gaps if I have gaps. Right. I'm chopping. This is so therapeutic. It's the best thing to be doing. And I also love that I don't have a pot of boiling water in the background, you know, compared to canning. After like a day out doing gardening all day on hot days, the last thing I want to be doing is canning. I'm grateful for the technology that allows us to do that, but I also love that we have even older technology that we can rely on to not have to do that. Okay, carrots. The carrots are somehow getting a little shorter and shorter, so that's fine. As long as all of them are relatively the same width. They fermented about the same time. And that's it. Then I just kind of lay the jar on its side and start stuffing it with carrots. These are really, really good foods for kids. Of course, I'm in the kids zone right now. I mentioned my kids a couple times, but like, because it establishes their microbiota and so good for them. But they also just love them. Like the stick shape is really good because it's easy to hold on to, super easy for putting into lunches as a snack. And mine like the ginger carrots just fine. They're not too spicy or anything like that. Okay. And I'm gonna put these in pretty well snug. Right? They're not perfectly flush on the top, but that's okay. I don't have any really tall ones. You'll notice that I'm doing this all with my hands. Again, just like cleanliness is important, but not sterilization. So if this were a canned vegetable, again, you would not be using your hands to fill these. You would be using tongs and there would be no hands allowed. So yeah, this is like a very different process. Great, and so I'm gonna do salt water. The same brine that I used. So this is the 2% brine that I had used previously, and I'll fill it all the way to the top. And for this setup, I'm going to use a small jar, which fits inside the larger jar. So my small jar, I just put water inside of it as a weight. You can use beans or whatever you want. Oh, it might overflow a little bit. I'll dump some out. There we go. So, you know, it looks a little awkward, but it's fine. It's low tech, it's great. So this has a small gap around it where the gases produced in fermentation will escape. I don't know why, but some recipes I've read say to put a lid on your jar and tighten it. Don't do that because it will explode. Like there's enough sugar in these carrots to shatter a jar. So it's just bad advice. Just leave it a little bit open, or if you had to put a lid on it, like this cucumber one, for example, I put the little weight on top to make sure that the salinity doesn't make the cucumbers buoyant, right? And I don't want any sticking up out of the brine. You could put a little mason jar lid on top of this and very, very loosely, like you don't want to trap the gas in there. You want to just loosely cover it, that's fine. Or you could just use a cloth like we did. That's fine too. If you trap gas in your cucumbers, it makes them fizzy, which some people think is kind of fun and they like it. Some people get a bit freaked out about that, but a little fizz is fine. Trapping too much fizz inside your cucumbers will explode all of the cells and then they'll get mushy. So it's not my favorite thing. Okay, very lastly, here we go. I've got, where's my jar? Got one more jar up here. I have 15 minutes. Oh yeah, Odin, I'll answer your question first. So how do you know when they're bad? Like, what's that situation look like? Well, I came to my carrot pickles a few days later, especially if I hadn't been skimming it, and I noticed that there was mold. I'd consider that to be bad. Certainly if there were any off smells. Okay, so when you first start doing this, you're going to be like, is that a normal fermentation smell or is that an off smell? And if you grew up eating fermented foods, maybe your barometer for that is different than someone who didn't grow up eating fermented foods. So honestly, your smell test is not the best test for fermentation, especially if you add something like an onion to your ferment. You're going to get sulfurous smells and kind of funkier odors, and that is normal and fine. It doesn't mean it's bad. One person will smell a batch of kimchi, for example, and say, oh, it's almost ripe. And then another person will smell that same batch and say like, oh, that smells like rotten cabbage. So it's food safe and delicious and healthy, but one person has a taste for that and one person doesn't yet, so or may not want to. Things like pickles, pickled carrots with ginger have more of a clean smell. There's less sulfur in them. They're not going to have a funky odor. So the best way to tell if it's bad is mold. There's going to be visible mold. Another way to tell is sliminess. Sliminess is actually a little bit of a gray area. There are slimy ferments that people do on purpose. If you've ever tried natto, it's stringy, it's slimy, it's mucousy, mucilaginous, whatever. And so slime can happen. Slime is not necessarily an indication it's gone bad, but when we're doing this kind of food preservation, we want crunchy pickles. I would skew away from anything that is slimy. So yeah, slime. The biggest indication that something is bad is if it is soft. So if I come by and my cucumbers, like these have never been heated, never cooked, they should be as crunchy as the day that they went in, right? So if I go to take one of these out to test it and it's soft, like it slides off your fork, then it's on its way out. Honestly, the brine will still have acidified. It will still not get you sick. I just think it's bad. It's not good. So slime is bad. Odors that completely turn you off. If it doesn't feel right, then don't eat it. But I have challenged myself with a few different fermented foods I wasn't familiar with, and it might be strong smelling, but I actually love the taste. Like learning to love blue cheese is an example of that, right? So with fermented food products, unlike with canned products, if it's bad, it will basically get up and like walk away from you. Right, okay. Lastly, I'm gonna make a mixed pickle. And this one, I loosely call it giardiniera, which is based on like an Italian pickled vegetable that is made with vinegar normally. And this one, I'm not making it with vinegar. I'm making it with salty water. So a similar vibe to traditional giardiniera with more probiotic benefits. So I got this kind of cool cheddar cauliflower, and I haven't tried it with this orange cauliflower before, so I hope it keeps the color. I tried it with the purple cauliflower one time, and sad to report that the purple color leached out into the brine and made the brine kind of gray. It didn't keep the beautiful purple color. Same goes with those purple beans in your garden. It's fun. It's a cool thing to do as a science experiment, to like watch that dye seep into your brine, but they don't stay purple. So we shall see if these ones will stay orange. I'm cutting off any yucky bits. I'm also using the freshest vegetables that I have access to. You can use up leftover vegetables, but the crisper that something is initially, then the crisper that it will stay once it's all said and done in the pickle brine. I only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to quickly throw this together. Bay leaf in the bottom, layering vegetables. So I'll quickly throw in some cauliflower. I love some onion in my giardiniera, sometimes garlic. This one I'm going to just put onion. And you can put it in a bowl and mix it all up, or you can do layers of it. It doesn't really matter. Those carrot bits that I saved from the carrot pickles are going in there. Because why not?
Hello.
Hi, Mike. I'm just doing a Zoom class right now. So these all go on top. Cut your carrots like, jardiniere is more of like almost like a chunky relish. So in this case, I'm cutting everything pretty small, right? Like smaller than just bite size. And you can do a similar thing with whatever veggies that you have around. So I've done it with, you know, like daikon and some ginger and garlic and green onion, and made kind of like a daikon kimchi type of thing. Whatever floats your boat. If you like this spicy, then like put in some fresh or dried chilies. Sometimes I make this one pretty spicy, but I'm the only one in my household that will eat it if it's spicy. That's the meat jar. Oh, I have 1 cucumber left over from pickling cucumbers. Heck yes, that's going in there. Perfect. Sometimes I put a little bit of bell pepper in here. I find that bell peppers they're a little bit tricky because they're softer to begin with. So I find that they don't become super crunchy. I wouldn't put like 100% bell pepper because it tends to get mushy quickly. So I would put a little bit in for color and for different texture. But mostly I want things that will stay a bit on the crunchier side. So now I've got cauliflower, onion, carrot, cucumber, and then I put a little bit more cauliflower on top and cover it up with more saltwater brine. So easy. Now we have like 3 jars of pickles already put up, and all of them are different. Okay, I think that's full enough. I'm going to have to make a little extra brine. I see that this isn't going to be adequate. So I'll do that off camera when we're done. And any herbs, if you wanted to put other herbs in here, oregano is amazing. I actually like oregano and jalapeno in mine. So I would put oregano sprigs, kind of intersperse them inside there. It's a little easier than chopped oregano because the chopped oregano will rise to the top. And again, it will create like a surface where mold could land. So you want to just avoid having anything kind of floating to the top there. Yeah. So there's my 3 jars. So proud of them. 1, 2, 3. When I do this as a live class, I do like a variety of vegetables. It's really fun to do like a get together with your friends to show them how to do this, because I super encourage people to pass on the skill once you've done a few jars and you're feeling a little more confident. Bring some people over and be like, hey, I have these odds and ends of vegetables. Each person can fill a jar and go home, and each one will be a little different because they had different input. But the cool thing as well is that there'll be different outcomes just based on fermentation. So in one person's home, the pickles might be a little crunchier because perhaps the ambient temperature was a bit cooler. And then another person's home was a bit warmer, so maybe they're a little softer. Or if you're a beer brewer or a bread baker, you have more resident yeasts in your home. And those will affect your fermentations a little bit too. So it's not negative, it's just different if you do beer brewing. Maybe just keep it a little separate from your vegetables fermenting because they can swap microbes. And some people are like, oh, my pickles are a little yeasty, or oh no, my beer went sour. So we're just trying to let them keep their microbes to themselves. Oh, I see some questions in my chat. I'm just doing this on my phone, so I didn't realize I missed a couple. Are you putting a bay leaf in? Yeah, I put a bay leaf in all of them, and that's because the bay leaf contains tannins, and the tannins help to keep them crunchy. I think that's all the questions I had. If there's any more questions, we have a few more minutes. What other ways can you make it spicy? so many ways to make it spicy. So if you have dried chilies, just put a whole dried chili in, or a couple. If you like spice so much that you want to just pickle your peppers, so you've got a whole bunch of like jalapenos or other peppers, you could do the same thing with just peppers. A little tip I learned for that is to take a bamboo skewer and just poke each one so that the brine can penetrate the pepper a little more easily, and it also makes them less buoyant because they're the little flotation devices, right? So you can do pickled peppers or pickled peppers with garlic or with ginger or whatever. So yeah, fresh or dried whole chilies are the best way to do it. With my bean pickles from last year, I actually used chili flakes because that's what I had. I was finding I had to skim them from the top, so that was a little less than ideal, but actually they turned out fine. So yeah, anyway, you want to make them spicy. I wouldn't get into using hot sauces per se, or if you did, make sure that there's no preservatives in the hot sauce. Uh-oh, my screen has frozen. I'm back. Hi guys. You still had audio, right? All good. Okay. You still had audio, I hope, during that answering the questions part. Didn't realize that if I went to my chat, my video would freeze. Okay, good. I'm glad you guys still have audio for that part. And now that I'm looking at the screen, if there are any more questions, send them to me. If not, I understand that this is on Facebook Live, which is awesome. Hi, everyone from Facebook Live, and will be on YouTube. So there are comments under there, and you guys could go at Rooted Nutrition. That's my business, Rooted Nutrition. And then you could ask me that question. You could also head on over to my website, rootednutrition.ca, or my Facebooks or the Grams or whatever, Rooted Nutrition Vancouver. And then you can ask the fermentation questions there, because I've attracted quite a batch of fermentation geeks. And so we like to talk about that type of stuff and answer questions. I get a lot of people send me pictures of their ferments with the "is this mold" question. It's super normal. And there's lots of really great forums now on Facebook for fermentation, and one of them is called Wild Fermentation. It's not moderated by the author of this book, but it is fans of this book. So I'd recommend getting this book first, reading it, and then any questions you have, you could find like-minded fermentation geeks there. Any last questions before we wrap it up? Oh, I'm just going to talk about timelines. I have 3 more minutes, so that's perfect. These will each take a little bit of a different amount of time to ferment. Cucumbers, 7 to 10 days in general. Like, my climate is pretty temperate. It's not getting super hot here. So if yours are done in 4 days, great. You use your taste buds, use the chop test and see if they're fully fermented, and then chuck them in your fridge when they're done. The fridge is a fermentation slowing device, so it's not for food safety, but it's just to keep them crunchy for longer. So putting them in the fridge is great. If you have a root cellar, perfect. Use your root cellar, right? The jardiniera. If you cut things about bite size or a little bit smaller, I would check these in a week. Again, a week to 10 days or so is about typical, and just use your taste buds to guide you. I find that carrot sticks are usually closer to about 2 weeks. So the denser the vegetable is, the longer it takes to ferment, right? For the acid to penetrate to the center of the vegetable, and the bigger you chop them, then the longer it will take. So you could even do the same method with a whole head of cabbage and do Ukrainian style pickled cabbage heads, right? And you would submerge it in a bucket. I poke holes in it too, so I would take bamboo skewer and stab holes all over it to get the brine in a little faster, but it will still take a couple months for that head of cabbage to fully ferment. So it's a longer process, but I would have one going, I think I had one going all winter, and then I would slowly peel off a few leaves and, make cabbage rolls or chop them up and make kind of a sauerkraut out of it. So yeah, you can do this with whole vegetables or chopped vegetables. Do it with radishes, even with radishes with the leaves on. Yeah, you can try lots of different things. So cool. I'm like, the sky's the limit. So yeah, I'm not getting too locked into a pickle is a dill cucumber. A pickle can be lots of different things. And now you guys know how to pickle all the things from your garden. So I'm also curious to know what you end up making. If you made something really cool from your garden, like a mixed pickle, or you got something that totally surprised you or whatever, then like let me know. Curious to see what other people are producing. Any last questions before we head out? No, I think we're in great shape. Cool. Well, hopefully that gives you the confidence to get started. And even if you just went to your crisper right now and found the freshest veggies, you could very quickly make a jar of pickles tonight. Put the top on it, like weigh it down, put it away, and check in a week to 10 days and see how it's doing. Great. Well, I'm going to sign off. And again, I'm Andrea Potter. I'm Rooted Nutrition. You'll be able to find me where you need me. Thank you so much, Odin, for organizing this, and to your organization. I'm stoked for you guys. I see one of your plots at the Woodland Garden, which is right by my house. All right, we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.